my name's Jeremy, and I work with a lot of our customers around how they think about APIs, not just in terms of selling them some software that will help them do APIs, but in actual fact, we work a lot of times with our customers around how the transformation that they're trying to do with their business. So it's not just we don't just work as a vendor. If you want to follow me on Twitter, there's my Twitter handle. I'll put these slides up on SlideShare afterwards as well, so you can see these later. I thought I'd start with some numbers, and I guess I'm not really expecting you to know what these numbers mean, but unless someone has an idea. So the first number is the fact that in the UK, there's 4, possibly 5 high street banks that have basically the majority currently of the share of your business, right? And this is a number from last year. There's about 29 current or pending reviews or applications with the FCA to be a bank, right? A lot of these are kind of being called challenger banks. And the last number is actually the growth of challenger banks. So challenger banks, according to Deloitte or KPMG, I can't remember which, are growing at 8.2%, and the established banks are actually shrinking. So, try and scare you at the very beginning. A lot of you are working at some of these big 4, some of you are working at the challenger banks. And really, the key thing about this is it's about digital transformation. It's coming to every single business, right? So the harder the barrier to entry, the longer it takes for digital transformation to reach an industry. In banking, there's a fairly significant barrier to entry in terms of, well, especially in retail banking, which is the amount of capital you actually need in order to be able to get your application through, and the fact that it might take 2 or 3 years even just to get that license, right? If we look at what some of the industries, the slides hopefully are coming through for you guys. If you look at some of the industries that have already been disrupted, music being one of them, retail. So in Apigee, when we work with our customers, typically the customers that we work with are the ones that are being digitally disrupted. So if you look at the long list of customers that we have, a significant number of them are in retail and telco, because those are industries where there's a lot of disruption that's been happening. Amazon and eBay have been around a long time. And the same with payments, right? We have a lot of payments companies that are working using APIs because payments is another industry which is already being disrupted. So technologies are changing the market context, and it's happened before, and it's going to continue to happen, not just in terms of APIs or mobile or Internet of Things, but there's all these sort of evolutions that happen, and you can probably list other companies alongside Blockbuster that have gone out of business because they failed to adapt, sort of the dinosaurs. And then what we see is sort of the bricks and mortar companies that are adopting the technology, a bit more like the crocodile which still exists today. And then we see that those companies that are kind of like a shark, they're constantly moving. They're leaving the old stuff behind, and they're moving forward. So in this sort of conceptual series that we're going through in this morning in this track around culture, we want to sort of touch on a few things that can help you change your thinking about this, especially if you're coming from a fairly traditional business. So companies that build their businesses take full advantage of a new technology are typically a disruptor. And I think the current poster child for this, the current company that's kind of everyone uses, if I talk to someone and say, give me a good example of digital disruption, a lot of people are saying Uber, right? This is a very traditional business of taxis, and here in London and in Paris, you see the taxi drivers literally blocking the whole city because they are feeling the sort of the pointy end of that disruption. In banking, I think that's slowly coming. It's kind of coming because the FCA, especially in the UK, is lowering the barrier to entry. And that's kind of what the statistics at the beginning I showed. So it'll be easier to become a bank today than it was a few years ago. And also, I think there's regulation coming in that's kind of forcing you down that way. But as you kind of think about that, there's other companies thinking about this going, well, I'm going to bypass all of this legacy stuff that these guys have, and I'm just going to disrupt it with totally new technology. Maybe I was going to put a screenshot up about this, but in my Facebook feed at the moment, I'm getting an ad repeatedly, and maybe it's because I work for an API company, but I get an ad saying, Mondo, the API company, and it keeps saying, we want you to be in our first 500 users to really test this new API company, and they've got a photo of an Apple Watch, and you can bank on your Apple Watch. And it might be that at a certain point, some sort of disruptor is going to come in and just totally bypass branches and just sort of the physical aspect of going to your bank, because a lot of people would feel like they don't need to do that. So the other thing is that I think, so there's those disruptors coming in. I think that the other thing is obviously right now existing companies are rebuilding their businesses around digital technology. And we see a lot of digital leaders. Here's some examples from people we've worked with at Apigee. So, Nike, a shoe company, Nike's business has exploded dramatically since they started using their Nike Fuel and using Nike Fuel and their social and media presence to communicate with their users. And the amount of people using their products has actually grown. That you can see how Nike is kind of, apart from their Super Bowl commercials, Nike has moved all of their marketing money into social and sort of online spend, right? That's really radical change, right? Apart from Super Bowl, which is kind of a one-off event, they're actually moving the way they spend their money to engage with their users. And that's shown dramatic growth in their business as a result. The statistics are kind of crazy. Each one of these other companies, even the BBC, which somehow, I don't know how the BBC ended up doing this, but maybe it's because of their charter that kind of that keeps them away from just being a commercial entity. But the BBC have ended up being a digital leader with iPlayer, and now they've just announced that BBC Worldwide is actually going to kind of compete with Netflix. So there are some poster childs of companies that are very traditional companies that are now embracing this technology and moving forward. The kind of like crocodiles, and maybe even some of these guys are more like the sharks that we talked about. But a lot of you are working at companies that are over 100 years old. In fact, some of the companies in the examples of the digital leaders are over 100-year-old companies. And what everybody's been talking about when we talk about APIs is about building a platform business, building a business where your business is a platform, that there's an ecosystem on top of it that creates far greater value than what you currently do today, right? So how do you actually become a platform business? And what is it that you have as this sort of super long-running company that's been established, that's acquired a whole bunch of other businesses all around? It's data, right? And data is at the core of what you have. It's the one thing that every other sort of digital native that's coming in to try and disrupt your business doesn't have. It's what that's like the core of what you have. And so what we would say is that as you start to liberate your data, and by the way, I mean, that's a massive topic, right? But your data is locked away in super big silos all over the place with teams who are extremely precious about giving that access to anybody else internally, let alone externally. But if you can liberate that data, and if you can build a platform with platform-focused technology to actually expose that, and you can build a vibrant developer ecosystem, you can actually build a platform business. And this is what we're starting to talk about to our customers, because this is at the heart of digital. And this is at the heart of what you can do as a business, is become a platform business. And APIs are obviously at the center of it. So, we talk about API ecosystems and developer ecosystems. I would say that for the scale of some of the companies that are here and around us here in Canary Wharf, internal API ecosystems are as big as the external API ecosystem. When an organization has 8,000 developers, maybe you should start with the internal ecosystem first before you try and crack an external ecosystem. And maybe you can sort of learn how to do this platform thing internally before you start to surface APIs externally? And if you're not doing it internally, what makes you think you can do it externally? There does become this sort of virtuous cycle as you embark on this quest to sort of liberate your data and build a platform around it. And what we've seen is that the first steps are pretty hard. You need to change a lot of people's thinking. But as you sort of get into this cycle, and apps are starting to be built based on these sort of APIs into the data, and the developers and partners, potentially external partners as well as partners, partners externally as well as internal teams. As you start to get this cycle going, it accelerates. It picks up speed, and it gets faster and faster. Don't expect the first time you expose an API internally or externally that everybody suddenly adopts it and uses it. You've got to build that momentum, But as you build that momentum, it accelerates and accelerates. One of the key things we realized in working with people around this is how you remove friction to be able to do it. And there's a number of different ways that we can do it, and probably talk a little bit more about that in the workshop that we've got this afternoon. But I'll touch on a few things. One of the first things that you need to start doing as you think about this is change the way you think about the whole problem, right? So this talk is about changing from thinking about things from inside out to outside in. So in Apigee, we call this the digital value chain, and most of our customers start thinking about the digital value chain from the back end, right? And this is all their systems. This is your SOA, this is your massive systems of record, these are your data silos. This is all the slow moving stuff in the two-speed IT world, right? And this is all your data. This is everything that you have. And most people think about coming from that side, what we would call the exposure side, and they think outwards along this value chain. What we found is that the most successful digital natives and digital immigrants, people coming into a digital space, actually think differently. They think from the outside inwards, because the moment you start thinking about taking your SOA WSDLs and huge, massive, 2 megabyte SOA messages your XML messages that you move around, and you try and take those and expose it just as another REST API, and you think that's kind of done, you will probably build the world's most complex REST API that is almost impossible for anybody to use, right? A really nice example from sort of another very complex industry, one of the ones that they've written some nice little booklets about their digital experience as they've moved is a company called Swisscom. And when Swisscom talked about moving from basically building an API for sending an SMS, they ended up building a REST API that had 60 fields. Now, you guys can all relate to this, because when you send an SMS, how much information do you need to know? The phone number, the body of the message. Do you want to send anything else? So if you're building an API to send an SMS, shouldn't you just expose a really simple API that's really easy to use? The more complex an API you build, the more complex it is for people to use your APIs. The whole point of APIs is to hide the complexity of the back-end systems, to decouple everything. And this is where, API teams, the teams that are actually building the APIs, they're coming from multiple disciplines. They're not just developers, right? An API team is actually, and should be, made up of people from marketing, people from, maybe even the users or the sort of the developers, a cross-functional team that takes into account all the concerns of what you're trying to expose, not just a pure sort of developer-focused or architect-focused team. And as you think about the outside-in approach, you encounter a whole pile of different things. We're going to talk about a little bit more about the use cases around this, but what you find is that as you think about it differently, the kind of APIs that you build might change, the breadth of APIs that you build change, and the number of APIs that you build radically increases as well. What we kind of see is that in the world of, Gartner tells you about bimodal IT, and we talk a lot about two-speed IT, and it's this idea that there's some systems that actually, rightly so, shouldn't change very often. If you have a mainframe system that's running, as your system of record for all of your core banking, you're not going to change it. The risk is just too great. I can't really see any major bank doing it. I mean, there might be one or two banks that have done it, but not many people have done it. Maybe the best thing to do is to continue to keep that, fairly robust system that's been around for a really long time, stable, with the teams who know how to look after it, doing what they do best, and keeping this thing 100% available, or as close to 100% as possible, and instead start to build layers on top of it. We would argue that even the sort of SOA middleware layers that you've built are actually still part of that slower moving, transactional focused exposure. These are all just exposing the basic set of services. Changing a SOA service takes months. I mean, I don't know if anyone's done it in days. Whereas when you think about the consumption layer, the outside-in layer, you actually want to have this super agile layer on top. So we would really say that you need to start thinking, when you think outside in, you need to sort of put another layer on top. And that layer is then the fulcrum that enables two-speed IT. It's this thing that you can change fast. If you can build a new facade in front of a service for a new device in a couple days, including testing it and everything, that's a success. That's a massive win. Where the business is saying, I want to build an iPad app or whatever, there's new requirements that they have. And it's not just about mobile apps, but mobile is a big driver for this. It's about being able to say, yes, we can do that. And that's what this additional layer kind of allows you to do. So I realize I'm probably running out of time a little bit, but some of the folks that we've been working on in this digital journey and who are starting to think about this as a platform business that they're building. And we'll talk about the use cases. We've got a sort of a longer workshop later on. We'll talk about some of the use cases. But what they're trying to do is both sort of around this efficiency and IT modernization. And we'll talk about how the different use cases you could do around this, and also the innovation and the ecosystems you can build on top of it when you think about your business as a platform business. So if this is the only takeaway that I can give you, you need to change the way you think. You need to think outside in, and you need to become a platform business. I think that's the key cultural takeaway. And when you're doing when you're moving towards this two-speed IT approach, you're going to realize, and someone talked about Conway's law before, you're going to realize that the way that you're organized is going to be reflected in the kind of software that you build. Sometimes you're going to have to leave certain teams doing what they do, and you're going to have other teams that are doing more modern things that are organized in a completely different way. And you shouldn't break what works in some areas, and you definitely need to innovate and apply modern, innovative techniques in other areas. And that's kind of the way that we would think and see the world. So I think there's probably still some time for questions, if you have any.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, 5 minutes. Yeah.
We have time for a few questions. I really like your slide when you show the value chain, like from the API provider, developer, and an end user at the end. And the first time I saw that, it was Sam Ramjee's, former VP of strategy of APG, that saying it's like the classic retail thing, like the consumer, the goods provider, you showed it, but how today, being sure as a company or as a bank.
I lost it. Oh well.
Yeah. Okay. But to have the heart of is coming back. To win the heart of developers, and how you think they're critical in the strategy of maybe open banking.
Okay. I'll not try and find my place in here. So how do you win the heart of developers?
Yes, and how important you think they are at the core of this new economy, or it will be mostly internal and partner usage, so the developer is just the hype.
Everyone's telling you that developers are at the center of everything. I think that there's a lot of truth in that. Even if you look at an internal API economy for developers, I think that it's very hard to make development teams build stuff in Java when they want to use Node.js, right? They want to do cool stuff. And it's very hard to keep the best developers if you're building stuff with, ancient technology. So I think that developers are kind of critical. So when I talk about this sort of, there are some guys that will always be mainframe guys. There are some guys that will, be your COBOL guys. And they've kind of decided that's their career and they're going to stay there. And I think it's good. And you need to do everything you can to keep them because they're becoming a rare breed. But at the same time, as you're sort of building the sort of systems of engagement, this sort of outer layer and perimeter, then you do need to have sort of more modern technologies and more modern ways for them to consume those technologies. So, for example, asking a developer to go to sort of some kind of UDDI, SOA registry to find an API to do what they do, or something else isn't the way that they do things anymore. What you'll find now is that the best ideas of what your developers can do is in a hackathon internally, where they found 10, 20, 100 different APIs. They built something you never thought could be built, and the innovation sparks off like that. So, I think, just to kind of answer the question, yes, developers I think are critical, and I think that developers coupled with someone who has a smart, savvy business sort of idea around, I'd like to build this, kind of can become a powerful connection. And if you try and mandate too much to developers, you'll probably lose them to somewhere where they can be a bit more creative. I think I answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. We have time for one more question. I think everything was clear. Let's say.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.